True crimers, welcome to Break the Case. I'm your host. I'm Jen Coffindaffer. I'm so excited today to bring Sebastian Rogers back into the spotlight. Sebastian Rogers was a young boy, really only 15 years old. He had autism and he went missing back February 2024, just last year. On February 26th was the last time he was reported to be alive. That was by his mother, Katie Proudfoot. She was purportedly the only one home. The last time we have true proof of life was the day before at the Texas Roadhouse. And then purportedly again, there is a video from her dash video that apparently his voice was overheard on. But last proof of life, certainly the day before, she says she woke him up at 6 a.m. to get ready for school, and he was missing. So Sebastian Rogers, we're going to also touch on Delphi, the Delphi investigation. Many of you who follow this channel know that that is a case that I think will always really bother me. Richard Allen was arrested years later, about 5 years later, for that murder, the murder of Abby and Libby, young girls that were horrifically killed with a knife in a rural area by the Mononhigh Bridge in Indiana, outside of Delphi, Indiana, on the property of another individual who the FBI strongly believed had, at least that there was probable cause that he actually did this murder. And but Richard Allen was ultimately convicted. We're going to talk a little bit about that and a little bit about the investigation. But I want to introduce my really special guest, and he's really special to me for a lot of reasons, but to all of you, some of you may have seen him. He was kind of a recurring homicide detective on The Last 48 Hours, which delve into different homicide cases and followed around different detectives because, of course, the first 48 hours is so crucial in all of those cases. His name is Dale Lundberg. He served since 1985 as a Dallas police officer, worked his way up through the ranks, which is exactly what you want to see when somebody finally gets the honor of being in the most elite group of detectives, which is the Homicide Detective Division. He earned that in 2004. He left the department in 2008, but never really left law enforcement. And in fact, he still works as a reserve officer in the small town he lives in. And so without further ado, Dale, welcome to the stage and the show.
Thanks for having me, Jennifer.
Thank you, Dale. All right, we're going to dive into it. We're a no-nonsense channel, so we get right after it. First of all, I guess, Dale, when we talk today, really want to draw on your experience. I always say that it's very easy when you don't do anything, you don't make mistakes, and the more mistakes you make, the more you learn. You hopefully don't repeat any of those mistakes. So I want to talk to you about specifically Sebastian Rogers. What was your first, and I know you've reviewed a lot of material that I've sent, you've reviewed the initial interview by a podcaster. We're probably going to go through that. What was your initial reflection when you saw that interview of Chris and Katie Proudfoot?
One of the things that really stuck out to me is the child was autistic. My wife and I spent, and mostly my wife, she's the one that got me into it. We were tennis coaches for Special Olympics for about 15 years. And so we have a lot of experience dealing with autistic children of all ages. And one of the things that you realize with these children is most of them are very much creatures of habit. And if there are usually certain things that they need a certain way. And when you said that this is a child that didn't like going outside barefoot, yet he left the house in the middle of the night without his shoes on, that to me just doesn't make sense.
Right. That's one of those clues that I think somebody, not only with your experience working cases like this, but also your experience with special needs situation, it's just glaring to me also. What did you make of the fact that he supposedly left with a fidget spinner, kind of those flashlights? I don't think it was a spinner, but he
Yeah,
fidgeted
yeah.
this item.
I
What
I
did you
I
think about
I
that detail?
it's like, how would she know if he left with it? If it's just something that he always had and was missing from the room, well, maybe it was just in the pants pocket that he normally wears. To me, that really didn't mean anything. But if you have a child who isn't prone to wandering, because I believe that's what they said, uh, if he's going to go outside at night, why wouldn't he grab a bigger flashlight? Why would he go outside anyway? Uh,
Right. The
chil-
shoes.
chil-
Oh, go ahead.
the
Sorry.
shoes, the children, if it's not anything that he has ever done before, to me, it's unlikely that this is going to be something that he's going to do. It doesn't mean that he couldn't have. It's just odd to me.
What about the fact this was a late evening, right? Really, the wee hours of the morning, past midnight sometime, in weather that would have been around 50 or below, cold essentially. There was no coat taken, again, no shoes. Does that strike you, especially considering that he was autistic?
It strikes me as unusual for anybody, even if they're not autistic. Uh, Here in East Texas, in the wintertime, it can get cold. I will go outside without a coat or shoes on if I'm just running out to my garage, but that's only 10 yards from my house. But if I'm going to go outside for any prolonged period of time, like most people, if it's cold out and you're going to be outside for a while, you're going to have shoes on, you're going to have a coat on, or at least a heavy sweater or sweatshirt. It's unusual that somebody would go out without those things, whether they're autistic or not.
And what about the fact that he had two small dogs? And apparently they were put in crates that evening, and they were at the, very close to his bedroom. Would they alert? Wouldn't they alert? I guess that is, none of us can truly say. But do you find it interesting that he was able to leave past the dogs without any supposed alert or his mother hearing anything?
Well, one, it depends on whether or not they're yippy dogs. There are some dogs that aren't going to alert on anything. It's just because it's not in their nature. The smaller the dog, it seems to me, the more yippy they are. And I know I have a big old 90-pound dog, and if I get up, he is going to let it be known that wherever I'm going, he wants to go there too. He's not kept in a kennel, but he's supposed to stay on his bed until he's told he can get up. And he lets everybody know when he wants to get up and go wherever you're going, because most dogs, have that fear of missing out.
Right. I found the whole dog situation odd, and they were those smaller, yippy dogs, as you described. So I found just that whole situation with the dog strange. There was another clue that I wanted to ask you about, and that was the fact that the mother, Katie Proudfoot, she said, and this story changed, but essentially at first she said she heard a commotion in the room at night around 10 and yelled at him. At first, she says she yells at him, like, shut up in there, be quiet. And then later, the story kind of, dissolves down to more like, hey, buddy, can you keep it down? But nevertheless, by the end, she says the noise she actually heard was a loud thud. What do you make of And I don't want to say a change of story, but certainly the story that evolved. Did you find anything odd about that?
Yes, because if something uneventful happens in your life, the very next day, are you really going to remember it? But if something happens that's really uneventful, that you really wouldn't normally remember in the future, but then soon after that, something tragic happens that may involve that normal thing that you really wouldn't have paid attention to, you're going to remember it. You're not going to forget that. It's kind of like uh, when 9/11 happened. Most people would never remember where they were on 9/11 had that tragedy not occurred. But because of that, even the little things of that day are burned into our memory. Uh, if I was a parent and I heard something like a bang or a loud thud at night, I would, especially if I had a special needs child, I'd go say, "Hey, buddy, are you okay?" Check on them. What's up? And if they were missing the next day, I would definitely remember exactly what I heard, when I heard it, and what I thought it was, and that wouldn't change. But that's me. Everybody's different. But
You
I'd
know,
also think that's most people.
what struck me, and I don't know if you had the same thought process, but just from different cases, with something like that happens, is sometimes that an excuse, and this is just what I've noticed, but I don't want to put words in your mouth, Dale, uh, where it also can serve as an explanation if later that child is found and is found to have any sign of blunt force trauma, that there's sort of this built-in excuse you've given. Oh, well, I
N-
did hear a loud thud, in other words, to explain an accident or something, and then maybe later your actions. Have you seen that in your casework?
I actually have, and I'm not going to get into the specifics of that case, but I will say, and if the detective that was working this case with me ever sees or hears this, he'll know exactly what I'm talking about. There was a case where somebody said that they heard a loud crash that they thought was a glass breaking that, well, eventually turned out to be a gunshot. But that glass breaking sound was worked into part of their story to have an excuse for something that they heard that woke them, or why they didn't get up after hearing, the loud noise. Oh, I just thought it was glass breaking.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly what at least crossed my mind is an
Yes,
excuse.
yeah, but especially with acts of violence, yeah, you say you hear a thud, okay, the person's found with, trauma to the head. Well, okay, that's probably the thud I heard. That doesn't mean, that I'm the one who put the trauma there. It must have happened accidentally when I was in another room. Yes, I understand exactly where you're going. And yes, I believe that that is something that a person may, that's something a person may say that's trying to cover their tracks a little bit before the whole story's found out.
Let me ask you something else too about the fact that he was barefoot. We know he went to bed. He often went to bed in these sweatpants that were described in different ways. Essentially, the bottoms were like a black Adidas sweatsuit. So, really not a sweatsuit, it's that thin kind of sweats with the
Yeah,
white.
yeah, yeah, kind of nylon-y.
Yes, yes. And then the shirt wasn't exactly a big hoodie or anything, but it was kind of a lighter layered uh, sweatshirt, if you even want to call it that. I probably wouldn't call it that. But my question to you is the fact that these no shoes, have you ever seen this in your career? And that's where something happens, whether intentional or not intentional. And the person that is killed does not have their shoes on at the time of their death. And because of all of the commotion or panic that can ensue, the individuals that might be responsible, or even if they're not responsible, the individuals that were responsible for removing that person did not trouble with putting on socks, putting on shoes, doing anything like that. I just wanted to ask you, in your experience, have you seen that?
No, I haven't. The vast majority of the murders that I work were actually drug related. I It doesn't mean that I exclusively work drug related killings. There was domestic violence killings. There were roommate killings and different types of murders where people would purposely doctor the crime scene to make it look like self-defense when it wasn't. Uh, but I've never had a case where somebody like removed the body from a location and wanted to make it look like the person went somewhere and forgot to take the shoes. It's not a type of case I've worked before. But
It
I
never-
know if I'm panicked
I'm
and
sorry.
I know if I'm panicked and I just did a horrific thing, one of the last things I'd worry about if I'm going to dispose a body is, oh, grabbing their shoes. I have much more important things on my mind.
Now, when it comes to Sebastian Rogers, there was this huge effort by law enforcement to search for him that morning when he was reported missing. Now, recall, the last time he was seen was the night before. And so there's a lot of room, a lot of time, hours and hours and hours from the time he was last seen by a third party to the time he was reported missing at after 6 a.m. The first call that was made was to the spouse that they were missing. I found that pretty normal. What I thought was interesting, though, in the interview, and I know you've watched it, was the panic that seemed to set in after that. Did that strike you at all as odd?
No, uh, it didn't, and that's just because I have seen so many different reactions to stressful situations from people. Some that I thought, "Oh, wow, I think they're guilty because, man, they wouldn't be acting like that if, they were innocent," or, "Wow, they're really subdued for this tragedy having just happened," but that's kinda suspicious. No, it actually didn't. And it's just because it's one of the big variables in people's personalities. Some people react one way to tragedies and stressful situations. Some people react a totally different way. We know what's normal for most people, but am I going to hang my hat on somebody's behavior in a single incident like that? No.
What about something interesting that went on with Katie Proudfoot right after this incident, right after Sebastian going missing, was the fact that they left the home. They left the home and they took to living in an RV in another state, actually, even to be closer, purportedly, to Chris Proudfoot, the husband's work, so he could work up there. For me, I'm just going to say what I thought. I thought it was very odd to have a missing autistic child that where they would know was their home if they ever had a chance to return, to
I
leave.
Yeah, I'm with you. I thought that was odd as heck, uh, and for the exact same reasons that you just described. You have a missing child. This may have been the only home that they've known for years, the only home that they would know how to get to. It's like if I'm a lost child and I finally turn up somewhere and I find a law enforcement officer or somebody and they say, "Well, where do you live?" I live here, and the child gets taken there and there's no one home. How horrible is that going to be for them? Every parent would think I need to be here at this home that is the child's home. So when they get here, somebody is here for them.
Yeah, that was one of the, probably for me, one of the oddest things that were done. And I want to talk about the other side of the pancake. I always say there's two sides to every pancake. And the reason that they purportedly left was because, in part, they were getting, besides the work, is they were getting threatened, right? Many people believed they were responsible for Sebastian going missing, and there were online threats and things like that. And she purportedly didn't feel safe being there. Um,
Was there any evidence of that?
no, no, other than everybody could see online, kind of the belief system of many people. But as far as anything threatening at their house, no. I mean, they later had cameras, and everyone in the neighborhood had cameras almost. There's so much video footage. There's hundreds of hours of video footage, which is the nexus to my next question. Dale, there is not 1 ounce of evidence that he left, that he was seen anywhere in that neighborhood, anywhere.
And that would be the most disturbing thing with all of the ring cameras that people have. Uh, I'm assuming that this is a fairly typical uh, suburban neighborhood. Would that be correct?
Yeah, it's actually really nice. It's a neighborhood that, I would say, very nice homes, brick homes. Most of them sat on, I would say, at least a half an acre to more. I would say middle class, upper middle to upper middle class, not maybe the upper, but very nice. This is nothing that's a poor neighborhood at all.
Yeah, and if you have, okay, I'm going to ask some questions because I'm not familiar with the geography there. Are there any green belts or uh, power line accesses or any other avenues that a person could take where they would avoid being caught on camera, even unintentionally?
It would be very difficult. I'm going to bring up, if I can, I always tell everybody, this is not, I'm not great at it, but I want to bring up the Nick Burrows tape. And that is a reporter that is in this area that followed this case closely. And he got his hands on this video from one of the neighbors, and it's only a minute long. But it shows that there's certainly shared green space area, and that's all, can be seen by people's videos. There's also, Dale, that's important, a wooded area that was extensively, flanking this neighborhood, that was extensively searched. Although some have pointed out it's so difficult to thoroughly search everything, but there were so many search parties, private and law enforcement wise, that scoured this area. Um, in any event, they never found one trace of Sebastian. They also never found any trace of a vehicle entering or exiting that wasn't known to the area.
That's unusual. And where the easy access point from Sebastian's house to that wooded area, would he have had to have walked by somebody who has a camera that would have captured an image of him.
Yes, he would have had to walk by other homes and in backyards and on the streets. If he went into that area, according to his father, he didn't like to be barefoot at all. And we don't know really, it hasn't been clear whether he just was shoeless or completely barefoot. The mother was very strong and strident about he didn't have his shoes because he only has a few pair of shoes and that he left without those shoes. But the father said he had suffered from a really bad fire ant attack. And so he was very cautious about his feet. Back to your point about autistic people and sort of following their normal rules and regulations.
Yeah. The not being seen on a video camera in a neighborhood like that with lots of cameras, that that to me just raises a lot of red flags. Because you would think if there's a lot of, like, the area that I live in, you could walk around here for probably 3-4 miles and not be picked up on a camera because, well, as you can see behind me, maybe through the glare, there's a lot of woods. There's not a lot of ring door cameras that would capture anybody walking on a street. But if you're in a suburban area where people have lots of ring doorbell cameras and security cameras, it'd be hard to walk too far without being captured by one of them.
Yeah, it's especially when you see the positioning of all these cameras from all these neighbors, it really caught everything. Interestingly, though, the Proudfoots, even though she worked for an electronics surveillance company, they didn't have it,
Really?
like a ADT. Yeah, I know.
Oh, that's funny.
I know. It's too ironic that at least at that time during this situation, no cameras. And we've touched on Dale a little bit on the show about the issue with CPS, the different reporting regarding those reports. Um, there's also a terrible audio that I know you haven't heard, but it is of Chris Proudfoot, the stepfather, really just going on a tirade about Sebastian, about how he was sick and tired of him, things like wetting himself, kept him in diapers full time, didn't like the way he cleaned his room, so threw everything in his room away at one point that was his and that Sebastian cared about purportedly. Well, I shouldn't say threw it away. I think he put it in boxes and gave it away, I think he says. But nevertheless, took it from Sebastian, so he didn't have it. And there's also events too that I can pinpoint where he discusses hitting Sebastian with a belt. Now he's pretty specific. He tries to say he only hit him once per time. And the reason I say there's two different times is he offers one excuse for one, which was something about lying, because at one point Sebastian had gone to teachers and had talked about how he was being treated, and he was reprimanded for that. And another time he talks about how Sebastian didn't have his belt on, so he beat him with a belt. What's your thoughts, reflections, working for 15 years with special needs about using a belt? Oh, wait a minute. I made this. Try now.
Can you hear me now? Hello?
We can hear you, Dale. Sorry.
Oh,
I think if
not
you're
a
not on
problem.
stage, you can't hear me.
Oh, okay. When I was growing up, my parents were firm believers in corporal punishment. I have spanked my children. I mean, not aggressively, and it was just a few times. But my children were not special needs. My children didn't have any kind of intellectual disability. And in all of the time that my wife and I were interacting with the children and the families of the special needs children, not once did I ever see any of the parents use corporal punishment in any way, shape, or form. Sometimes they had to be restrained because of aggressive behavior on the part of the child, or we called them athletes because they were our athletes that we were training and working with. And I just find it hard to believe that somebody would think it think it's proper to use corporal punishment on a special needs child.
Now, I should point out that Chris Proudfoot, the stepfather, was purportedly not home. Now, there is various information about this. Of course, I mentioned that there's cameras everywhere, and unfortunately, we in the public don't have a lot of those, a lot of that footage. But there is a lot out there. But there's different interviews where he speaks, meaning Chris Proudfoot, the stepfather, as if he was there that night. He describes things. He talks about the window, and he just acts as if he's there when he's speaking. Which Dale, in my experience, when people start talking, it's a wonderful thing because they mess up and they say spontaneous utterances and they mix in truth with their self-serving statements. What do you make of sort of, I guess, the lapses of judgment where he tends to talk about the fact or recite facts as if he's there?
Okay, I'd find that suspicious, but I would temper that suspicion with the physical evidence that I could actually get my hands on that could prove whether or not he was actually there. One, you have all of those security cameras in the neighborhood. I'm sure if he returned to the location, that would have been captured, or his vehicle would have been captured on one of the security cameras. Does he have a distinctive vehicle?
Yes, he has a distinctive truck.
Okay. Uh, and two, I wouldn't just rely on the videos. I would also use the cell phone information. And it's not just the cell phone information. You can also, like, lots of people watch these true crime shows. Lots of people watch like CSI shows, and they know that, oh, if I have my phone with me, they can prove where I was at. Well, there are many other things that can prove where you were at, whether or not you have your phone. How many people have an Apple Watch or have a the the Android version of a Apple Watch? You know, you'll have things in your car that will show where you are, but there's a plethora of things where you might be able to prove where somebody was or was not through some type of electronic device, even if it's not a phone. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah, truck information, in other words, the vehicle data information from late model vehicles. Uh,
Mhm.
so much information. I agree with you. The data, the apps that people utilize, which is what you were referring to as well. You know, it's always hard being on this side of the lens now because we have so little information really, and they've remained very lipped, meaning
Yeah,
law
yeah,
enforcement.
and I agree. As I was watching these videos, I had so many questions like, did they do this? Did they do that? Because if I knew the answer to this, then I wouldn't even think about going in this direction of the investigation. Or did they, do or not do these other things? For instance, with the house. Uh, when the officers initially responded to the house, were photographs taken? Did they take notes on the condition of the house? Did they find any reason to suspect the mom or believe that they should get a consent to search and process the house just to say, hey, just to cover our bases and to remove any suspicion from you, can we do these things in your house? Uh, to show that we know nothing untoward happened here. I don't know what those officers did or didn't do, and that's kind of frustrating, actually.
Yeah, I agree with you. From all reports, though, we know a couple of things. One, they did not luminol the house. So there was nothing done in that regard. We also know that the house was extremely picked up, cleaned. Everything was perfectly in its place. We know.
Okay, I'm going to say this. It's one thing for them not to uh, get a search warrant and completely process the house that night. It would be very unusual if they did. But if there is any suspicion whatsoever that the family may be involved and you want to really rule that house out as a crime scene, develop probable cause if you can and get a search warrant and then go back and do it. No one ever said you can't go back there and try to get evidence that you didn't know you needed the first time you were there.
We do know the vehicles were searched multiple times. I believe the house was searched multiple times. We also know that dogs were brought in. In fact, if you believe Chris Proudfoot, the stepdad, I believe he's reported over 10 different dogs. Dogs, that are famous dogs. I mean, a lot of different dog handlers and dogs wanted to be a part of this. And essentially, that right after this happened, so the 26th, I believe there were around 5 dogs that were involved. And one of those dogs took a scent, but not Sebastian's scent, which is very important, to a retention pond that was at a work site, construction site that was very near this neighborhood. They drained that retention pond, nothing was found. But again, once it was really clarified from law enforcement, it was not Sebastian's scent, it was a human scent. So somebody from that house had gone to that retention pond area. Do you make anything of that?
No, no, it wasn't Sebastian sent, so it just doesn't matter. Now, them draining the pond, were they just looking for a body, or were they looking for something that could have also been a weapon that was chucked into the pond and maybe submerged in the muck?
I think they did a good job draining that pond because it was only a couple of feet deep. So uh, they would have seen a body. I think they did it to see if there was any uh, evidence of any crime that could have happened. As you mentioned, a
Yeah,
weapon, clothing, just anything. And they found nothing. What they didn't do was they did not search the dumpster that was there, and I want to add a very important thing that they did do. Law enforcement right away obtained a search warrant for the dump site. The dump site for where the trash of the Proudfoots would have been dumped at. And they got a search warrant and they sent a crew there that was there for only about 24 hours, searching the area where that dumpster would have dumped. The trash would have been dumped. What do you make of that? Because I got to tell you,
It
I
would
thought of that.
it would probably take a lot longer than 24 hours to search a dump site. Uh, I had a case with a body in the Dallas city dump, and one, I didn't realize it was such a complicated operation. I always thought, hey, they're just bringing trash up there, dumping it, and then going on. No, there's a lot more to it than that. But you would have to one, you're not going to know the exact spot. You're going to have an area where the trucks were dumping at a particular time. So at least you have that. But you're going to have not only that whole grid that the trucks were dumping in that at that time, but you're going to have to dig down. And not only are you going to have to dig down, the body is not going to be in the same condition it was if it went in there whole, because after the trash is dumped, you get dirt spread on it. Then you have, these big roller trucks go over it. Then you have another layer of dirt put on it, plus more rollers going over it, then more trash over the same spot, and then more dirt, rollers over it again. So you're going to have a very compacted body that's will have been probably gone over multiple times with different layers of trash and dirt, and it's all going to be extremely compacted. Does that make sense?
Oh, it does. A case I always kind of talk about related to exactly what you're saying there was a case of Quentin Simon. He was a little boy who was murdered by his mother, thrown in a trash dump. She's been convicted. That was caught on tape when she threw the body in there.
Oh God.
And so they knew exactly what dumpster. And so they could pinpoint, like you said, it's complicated. You don't just dump anywhere. They have specific times, specific dumpsters are dumped and where they're dumped. It took the FBI's evidence response team 5 weeks of essentially round the clock grid searching that area where it could have been dumped. And they finally found the remnants of Quentin Simon.
Well, kudos to them, because that's a lot of hard work in a very unpleasant area to be in.
Yeah.
So, and one thing, power to you guys who actually work child murders. That's one thing that I always thought it would be extremely difficult to do. Uh, it takes a completely different mindset to routinely work child murders than it does adult murders. And I know a lot of people might think that that's odd, but they really are two completely different animals as far as how you approach those cases, but also the toll it takes on your own emotion and your own soul.
Yeah, I agree. And I will say Violent Crime Squad for 15 years. And I told my supervisor very early on, if you can keep me away from those cases, obviously I'll do whatever you need. But the child porn cases, the child abduction cases, the cases where children were sexually assaulted, as far as I could stay away, I tried. Unfortunately, with those kinds of cases, a lot of times females are desired to speak to the mother, to speak to, the individuals involved in those cases. So you get wrapped up in them. But I agree with you. Working adult cases, totally different than how I would go home when I worked a case involving a child, especially when it was day after day sometimes.
Oh, I know one of the things that really struck me is when I worked offenses involving children that were the same ages as my kids, it seemed to hit a lot harder. Now, because I worked homicide, I didn't work child homicides. We had a special unit for that. But when I was in patrol, whenever I would work one of the severe cases of child abuse or a dead child, it seemed to always hit me a lot harder when that child was the same age that my children were at the time.
Yeah, I talk about sometimes the very last case I worked really as an FBI agent, and that was a 6-year-old autistic boy who went missing. And go to the house, uh, obviously took everybody in that house, polygraphed everybody, and Mama kept failing her polygraph. So our spotlight was on her. The story made no sense. He was a wanderer, but there's a special name for that. Forgive me, I just forgot the name. But they're specifically autistic people who want to leave and who explore. And they had that house all boarded up, Dale. And the house was really controlled by about 20 cats. The whole box was just a litter box. The mattresses were on the ground, feces everywhere, rats. It was one of the worst conditions of a home, one of the worst that I've seen. And none of it really made a lot of sense. He was found at about at a neighbor's pond, very close by, deceased. Natural, he, as many do, wandered into that pond.
Mhm.
And the reason the mother had failed the test was because she felt so bad that she had taken a man home that night and forgot to lock the door. And that's what it ended up, the question, were you any part of him being missing, or words to that? As you know, there's only 1 to 3 questions ever asked. And that's what she
Yes.
came on. And that's what it ended up being.
Yeah,
Um,
that's a horrible burden she's gonna have to live with.
but that child was 6 and my child was 6 at the time.
Mhm.
And I'll tell you, every day coming home was really hard. But why he was missing, and then certainly um, after he was found. But back to Sebastian, I've always said that's why you have to be very careful with these cases involving autistic kids, because they do often wander. But oftentimes they don't wander, and they're murdered. And in every case so far that I've seen, particularly on this end covering, everyone has been by a family member. It's not been by some random stranger that the autistic child was killed. I know you didn't work children. Uh, do you know, or have you ever had discussions with any of the homicide guys that might have worked autistic kids? And again, he was 15, so um, where you knew that to be either true or untrue.
No, but I will say this, something that you mentioned, uh, made me think of a different case that I had. Uh, Sebastian had bathroom issues.
Mhm.
He probably had behavior issues. His mom was married to a man that is not his father. I'm sure that because of his bathroom issues, some of his behavior issues, that caused a lot of stress in the family. And I know that there are times when, well, I'm just going to stop there and I'll just talk about the case that this reminded me of. You disappeared. Are we still there?
I am totally listening.
Okay.
When I
Okay.
disappear, it's because I'm looking at chat to see if there's any interesting questions to ask you or things they might be concerned about, but I am full on listening. In
Oh,
fact,
okay.
I can't wait to hear what you have to say.
Oh, well, uh, this case was actually involved a married couple where the wife had uh, chronic digestive problems, and she was always feeling sick. She became a chronic complainer because she couldn't eat anything, was always undernourished, and was always hungry at the same time, but couldn't eat because she had digestive issues. Uh, she was very frail, and her husband was just very, very, very frustrated with her. And one night he just had enough. And when something happened that led to her demise, and there was some culpability on his part, but it was all because of the chronic problems that she had that was making his life miserable. And it was the only way that he could really get her out of his life. And when you have I, I'm trying to say this in such a way, I don't know who caused Sebastian to be missing. I don't know if he is dead or alive. I'm praying that he's alive. But I also think that the likelihood of that being after this much time with nobody seeing him is low. But I do understand how living with somebody with special needs creates stress in somebody's life and might lead somebody to do something that they might not normally do. Does that make sense?
Oh, it makes all the sense in the world. The triggering events and frustration, I believe you could hear. And again, I've listened to Chris Proudfoot so many times. You could hear he talks about how frustrated he was, and you can hear almost the anger in his voice. I wanted to let you know too why Sebastian Rogers likely suffered from incontinence and why he had to be diapered. And I want to make it clear this is straight out of the mouth of Chris Proudfoot that he made him wear diapers 24/7 by the time all of this happened. And the only time he didn't have to wear them was when he was at his father's house because his father wouldn't put up with it. But what you don't know, Dale, is Sebastian was sexually molested by a person that the Proudfoots allowed to live with them, an older boy that sexually molested Sebastian when he was much younger. And I believe that is attributed to some of the behavior problems as well as the incontinence.
That's horrible. That's
Yeah,
truly horrible.
it is, Dale. And I think it goes back to, the whole point of how he was treated before he ever disappeared. And just in my experience, it, it means something. Not always, but often it means something when you're looking for motive and you're looking for treatment. And it is very clear that Sebastian, at least from everything we know in the public eye, and what's really said by Chris Proudfoot, that he didn't treat him well, at least by most standards.
Yeah, when I was watching one of the videos regarding this case, one of the things that kind of stuck out was what the neighbors said that they had heard Chris Proudfoot saying about Sebastian. Did anyone ever check to see if the neighbor who was saying that they overheard Chris Proudfoot saying that, he wanted Sebastian out of the house or any of the horrible things that he said about him? Did anyone ever try to confirm if they believed those statements were true, or maybe the neighbor was just making that stuff up because they had a beef with Chris Proudfoot and were just trying to get him into trouble?
It's such a good point, right? It's so easy to take these neighbor statements or statements from individuals at face value, but you always have to evaluate, does anybody have an ulterior motive? And we don't know. It's so hard being on this side because, like you and I both in law enforcement, we're used to being on the other side where we get to know everything. And
Yeah,
now we
and
get
and we know what questions we want answered. Like,
right.
that's one of the things I would wanna know. Okay, this person is saying that Chris Proudfoot said these horrible things about this child. Are they true? Were there any police reports, from, the neighbor and the Proudfoots? Was there some kind of property dispute? Were they just unhappy with each other? Or was the neighbor just being totally honest?
Well, I tell you, for me, what has solidified my concerns about Chris Proudfoot and his treatment of Sebastian Rogers was hearing for myself his own voice speak so horribly about Sebastian in such a mean and vicious way. When I heard that recording, it's been hard for me to unhear it because that was, in my view, the real Chris Proudfoot, uh, and how he viewed Sebastian. And by the way, this was after his death, or I shouldn't say his death, I'm so sorry, after he went missing. This was
Yeah.
after he went missing. Um,
It's that kind of confirms what the neighbor was saying.
right, exactly. When you hear somebody has that capability of having such anger and, you know, for really a child, a 15-year-old young man, it's hard for normal people really to understand, but unfortunately we've seen it a lot where people just don't have the ability to empathize, and they have the true ability to hate. I would love to go through, if we could, the initial interview of the Proudfoots. Now, Chris Proudfoot has been all over the internet giving interviews to everybody, and there's way too much footage to go over. But I always believe that the very first time individuals are interviewed, parents in this case, there's a lot to glean. I know you've watched it, and I'm hoping we can kind of fast forward some parts, but I wanted to get your reflections on some of this that was said by both Katie and Chris. This is going to go hopefully well, but my technological abilities can somewhat be compromised. So let me try to get this up really quick. I'm going to put it up on the screen. Oh, I've got to remove Sebastian. Remove that. I'm going to add this. I'm going to go into my other email. Can you still hear me?
I can hear you fine. I can even see you.
Oh, great. Okay. Can you see Nick Barris up here?
Uh,
Ooh, wait a minute. Watch
Put
out.
the cursor where Nick Barris would be.
Can you see this?
Okay, right now you're sounding all garbled.
Well, that's what I was afraid of. Sorry. When I try to share screen, for some reason, it garbles me and does no good. So I'm going to bring that back down. But I know you've watched the clip of the first interview, which was
Yes.
Chronicles of Olivia. Tell me what your reflections of just regarding Katie Proudfoot, the mother, if anything stuck out to you.
Really nothing stuck out to me. Uh, there were times when she was getting a little emotional, and it was hard to tell if the emotions were truly genuine or not. Uh, watching Chris in the interview, it seemed that he almost seemed rehearsed and a little too easy in his answers, especially after, I had heard about how what his true feelings about Sebastian probably really were, but in the end, I really have no opinion one way or the other on the interview. It really meant nothing to me. I'm sorry.
No, I want an honest reflection. So the one thing that bothered me on the initial interview with Katie was her just inability to make eye contact. But I think to your point that everyone responds differently, perhaps that doesn't mean as much as to me. I found it sort of disassociating.
Yeah,
Uh,
well, you see, I actually had a conversation similar to this with one of the investigators that I was helping conduct an interview with not long ago, and we were talking about signs of somebody being deceptive in an interview, and how different it is depending on what setting you're in, and unless you are in an interview room that's very controlled with no table, nothing on the walls, no distractions, where it's just you and the person you're interviewing, where you can see their entire body and see their reaction to each question, and then see what reaction you get when you go back to a question where you thought there may have been a reaction previously. You really can't make any assumptions on somebody's behavior or where they're looking or how they're looking or whether or not they're looking you in the eye when you're talking to them. Uh,
I think it's such a great point, Dale, because you're exactly right. When you're in the room with somebody and you're seeing their arms and their hands and fidgeting and really how they're speaking, and also these, even the first interview we saw, it was very clipped, right? I saw
yes.
where it would cut and then they'd cut back and cut back multiple times. And so you're not getting a true reflection of what's going on. You make such a great point, a point that uh, I don't think anybody's brought up. There's so many people on the internet now and have YouTube channels, and they are, body experts, eye
Yeah.
experts, all that stuff
Yeah.
that we're taught.
Yeah. You might be able to infer things at times, but how accurate is that really going to be? It's like we're talking. You ask me, "Hey Dale, what do you think about your neighbor Nick?" And I go, "Oh yeah, he's a nice guy." You might think, "Oh, he scratched his face while he was doing that. That was a self-soothing distraction. He must really hate his buddy Nick." Or maybe man, I just had an itch then. So we have to go back and revisit that question again later and see if there is some kind of reaction that I give to that same question, even if it's asked a slightly different way. But, just in an interview like what we saw, you're unless they come out and confess something that's damning, I'm not going to take it for anything.
Very good.
I'm really not going to try to read into anything.
I know, I mean, personally, for me, I haven't talked a lot about their videos other than the words they've spoken. As an example, Katie Proudfoot wouldn't interview, didn't do YouTube for about a year. And then she did a second interview, just herself without Chris, because there was a lot of belief that Chris talked over her in that first interview. And, she was the one that was supposedly there. Why is he answering all the questions? You saw him interrupt and kind of take over the interview.
Yes.
And
He's a controlling personality, I believe.
yes. And in the second interview, it was just her. And there was the only thing I've really pointed out that to me, I didn't like one bit was she basically said a reference about Sebastian's birthday and that he basically was gone, was not with us, that if he would have had a birthday, or if he would have been 16, I can't remember the exact words. And then she stops and she realizes, oh my gosh, I can't believe I said that. That's the look on her face. Whoops. And she takes this huge breath, like that. And she starts all over and then says he'd be 16 or he's 16, something like that. Anyway, that was the only, to me, I saw that one as kind of a red flag, but maybe it's because Dale, she's like most of us, and we just believe so much time has gone by that is so unlikely he's with us.
Yes. And just think if all of a sudden there's just, a wave of emotion and remembering her child and that he's coming up on a birthday or some other anniversary event. It would be natural for those emotions just to well up where she'd have to compose herself for a second. Or yeah, so to me, stuff like that in those types of interviews, I really try not to read anything into them. I just take those at relatively face value.
Let me ask you, moving on, about your belief. Where do you stand on polygraphs?
Okay, I'm gonna tell you what one of my I have a friend who went to the Defense Linguistics Institute for the Army, and he learned Russian, and his job was to interrogate Russian officers if we ever went to war with the Russians. And he went to many, many, many schools to learn different interrogation techniques. And one of the things that he told me that really stuck out is he said, the polygraph is good on your average person, especially if you're just going to be using it for like pre-hire screenings. But he said there's three people that you never polygraph. He said one is a politician because and lawyer, he included lawyers. He said politicians and lawyers. He said that's because they lie so often that the polygraph isn't going to show that they're showing deception because they lie so often, their body's used to it, and you're not going to get a reaction. He said the other person that you never polygraph is another intelligence operator because they know how to defeat the polygraph. And he said the third person you never polygraph is somebody involved in law enforcement. And when I said, "Well, why not people in law enforcement?" He said, the risk is too high of getting a false reading showing that they're being deceptive when they're not. And when I asked for an explanation, he said that most people in law enforcement have such a heightened sense of right and wrong that, one, they will have a they will become more emotional just from the accusation than a normal person would. He said, or they might not be, you'll ask them a question and they might have done something wrong in their past, not in the incident that you're talking to them about, but they will associate the question with what they did in the past and feel so guilty about that that it will register as deceptive when they, truthfully respond to the incident they're being questioned about. Did I explain that okay?
Yeah, you did. I'm so glad you touched on this. And I want to ask you, have you ever had to take a polygraph?
Oh yeah. I let's see, when I was a security guard for the American Security Corporation, I caught an employee stealing uh, a bunch of items, and their union required me to take a polygraph, to show that I was just not trying to get that employee into trouble. Uh, when I applied for the Dallas Police Department, they polygraph you, and then in the you know just in the course of being a police officer, you're going to get accused of stuff, and hey, we're going to give you a polygraph. Okay.
Yeah, obviously, as an FBI agent, we're polygraphed every 3 years if we have top secret clearance. And I had top secret clearance. And I never really believed that much in polygraphs, only because I had two cases where people beat it. I've never seen an innocent person. Well, I shouldn't say that. I've had several partners who have failed their polygraph on the first run. Exactly what you're saying. They just such a heightened awareness, I think, of anything being wrong and thinking about all that, and their emotions get out of control. But I was talking to our lead polygrapher in Houston about it when I was a younger agent. And I said, I don't even know if I believe this was before I even had to be polygraph. It was before you had to be polygraphed to be an FBI agent, and it was before the 3-year rule. And so as a very new agent. And I said, Gary, rest his soul, Gary Steger. I said, I don't know if I believe in polygraphs. I've just seen too many people beat it. He goes, all right, come over here. And he hands me 10 pieces of paper. He said, write the numbers 1 through 10 on there. Stick them in your pocket. He said, take one of those numbers out and, don't put it in your pocket. And I said, okay. And so we go through the numbers. He says, is it number whatever, blah, 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 blah. And he says, all right, just hand me the number 2 because you didn't put it in your pocket. I'm like, how did he know that? I mean, I was in my brain going, gosh, don't say the number 10. Don't say the number 10. And it was the number 2 I hadn't stuck in my pocket.
Yeah.
And he showed me my chart. My chart was like flatlined. And then when he said, is it the number 2? It was like, "Let just tell you this, Jen. Never lie
Yeah.
in polygraph because you're going to be toast." He said, there's some people who are really good liars and really deceptive. They lie all the time. Their heart, he goes, you're a hot mess over here. He goes, don't ever take one if you're going to lie.
Yeah.
Some people, I think, just like you said, for various reasons, um, you know. So basically, what you're saying is they can be a good investigative tool, but they're not that accurate.
Correct. You can't rely solely on that. If you have a person that you just want to get off your plate, you don't think that they're really involved, but you're just not quite sure. you one of the things. Okay, uh, I think I only asked people to take polygraphs maybe 3 times in the 8 years I was in homicide, because if I had to use a polygraph to try to make a case on somebody, it was gonna be a weak ass ca oh, sorry, a weak case. Uh, when the time that I actually asked a lot of people to take polygraphs was when I was in the robbery unit. Uh, and the people that I would ask to take the polygraph wasn't my suspects, it was my victims, because I would have, well, many times I would get a case and patrol would do a good job, or I would get a lead and we'd actually be able to arrest somebody on the case. And well, I'll give you a good example. Uh, and you're familiar with the Dallas area, so you'll understand what I'm talking about. Plano, Texas, very upper middle class to affluent suburb of Dallas. It's on the north side of Dallas. To get from Plano to the Fair Park area of Dallas, even at 3 in the morning when there's no traffic, it's going to take you a half hour, 40 minutes. Is that roughly true?
Yes.
And is it normal for a upper middle class white businessman to go driving around the Fair Park area of Dallas, which is very crime ridden? Is it normal for him just to go out for a drive and end up in that neighborhood in Fair Park?
Right. Absolutely not. It doesn't make
And
sense.
so, yeah, but I would get these guys who would, decide to go down to that area of town, and they would get robbed, and I'd ask them, "What brought you to this neighborhood at 2, 3 in the morning?" "Oh, I was just out for a drive." And I tell them, I says, "Listen, we have a suspect in custody on your case, but I cannot put this person in jail for a first or second degree felony that they could get up to 50 years in prison if there's any type of a lie associated with it." I said, "If you were down there to buy some dope, to pick up a prostitute, or to do something, else that might be slightly embarrassing, just be honest about it and I can still put this person in jail." I said, "But I can't put this person in jail for this very serious crime that you're accusing them of if there's any type of a lie associated with your story." They go, "No, I was just awake and just driving around and stopped at that intersection and got robbed." I said, "Okay, would you take a polygraph?" "No, why would I need to take a polygraph? I'm the victim." I said, "Well, it's just, a routine investigative tool, and, it would prove to me that you're telling the truth." "Well, I think you're just a horrible detective that I ain't taking a polygraph," and off they'd storm out, and I had my answer more often than not just with the asking them to take the polygraph. And
No,
like I said, it was usually the victims I would ask.
yeah, no, I absolutely agree. Just the discussion when you ask somebody to take a polygraph, boy, when they're ready to take it, yeah, hook me up. I'm not lying.
Yep.
Glee. That's the answer you want to hear. When it's, oh, I need a lawyer, and oh my gosh. Now some people just generally don't trust the police, but that is just not the usual response of somebody who isn't involved,
Yep.
typically.
That's correct.
So I want to,
Especially if somebody knows that there's suspicion on them, you know?
right. Uh, because I know our time, I don't want to impose too much more on your time. I'm going to have you back to talk about Delphi, but I want to wrap up a couple more questions about Sebastian Rogers. And that is sort of the response, and maybe you'll have the same answer, but in response to him being missing, there's been quite a different reaction by the biological father versus the biological mother and the stepfather. The biological father, actually, as we speak, is at the police station, because today is actually the 18-month birthday of Sebastian being missing, for those who don't know. And he's there just, I think, with a bullhorn saying, I need answers because law enforcement has shut down everyone. They have not come out except for with a couple of minor statements when, for instance, the public was asking if somebody had been interviewed that was at the restaurant where Sebastian was last seen. He was interviewed, or he hadn't been interviewed, so they interviewed him, or her, I should say, and then they came out with a statement. But they haven't addressed publicly anyone since, I believe, April 2nd of 2024. It's been a long, long time. Now, there's been a lot of repeats that I've seen where they were interviewed and then they sort of repeat show it.
Hmm.
But what do you make of, talk to me about why a detective and why the police will not come out and talk to the families of missing children in this case?
Uh, there's numerous reasons why they probably don't want to share information with the family. I know when I was a detective, I would tell the family from the very get-go, uh, I'm not going to tell you anything. I'm going to do my investigation. If you call me and ask me for info, I'll let you know whether progress is being made, and I'll tell you that, or I'll tell you, that we're still working on it, but I'm not going to share any information about the case with you. You don't know who the family's friends with, who they're going to share that information with, if it's somehow going to get out to the press, and you never really know what the family's involvement may or may not be with the offense. I've worked offenses where someone was killed and half the family was involved in some way, shape, or form, and that wasn't initially what we thought when the murder first happened. So to me, it's the proper thing for law enforcement not to share the specifics of the investigation with the family. I would actually be disappointed if they did.
Okay, Dale, I'm going to ask a step further now, though. What I have found offensive, first of all, the public, we're not entitled, we don't need to know. I could care less about that. But when it comes to the families, I have issue with, you don't need to tell them about the investigation per se, any details, but you should be in communication and just saying, listen, we have no leads. Listen, we have some leads. Listen, I can't share anything, but I promise we're on it. Just communication, saying where they're at.
Th-
Just,
th-
what do you think
that
about?
that I think that's fine. And if I had a case where I truly believe that the family was not involved, I would make sure that they received a phone call periodically, or they had my number where they could call me, and I would tell them, yeah, we're still actively working on it. There's things that we're doing. I just can't share those things with you.
So, Dale, my belief now is that this case is cold. I don't think there's leads coming in. I don't believe that they're actively working it because I don't think there's anything they can work. I do believe they likely have a thought process on the case and what's happened, but can you talk to us a little bit about what happens? And I know you and I worked a case like this, but what happens when I know, uh, but
Yeah,
but what happens when you have a case, you think you know who did it, you've got the probable cause, but you don't have beyond a reasonable doubt, and how frustrating that is.
that's extremely frustrating. And those are the cases that it seems no matter how long it's been since the last bit of information has been developed that you could follow up on has been, you still keep that case file on your desk, just hoping that a call comes in or new information is developed, so that you can get back to that case. But it's extremely frustrating when you believe you know who killed this person or caused them harm, but you don't have enough to put that person in jail and keep them in jail. I will say that there are numerous times when I did not have enough information to get somebody convicted, but had probable cause to get them arrested, that I would arrest them just to put them in jail because one, I knew they did it. And two, a lot of things happen when you put your suspect in jail. One, your suspect may start to chirp to some of the people in the pod with them, and many times they'll come forward and help you out with your case. Witnesses who weren't going to come forward as long as the suspect was free now see, okay, he's in jail. I'll talk to the police now because, I feel a little safer now that he's in jail. But for the most part, if you have like just enough probable cause to put somebody in jail, you're not normally going to do that. And if nothing else comes in, it's just frustrating, especially when there's a very dangerous person out there who has literally gotten away with murder and they did it. You just don't have enough to prove it to a jury.
All right. Well, I tell you, Dale, this is a case that for many people, really millions of people around the world, it's not being covered very well now. It seems to, for some reason, when when it goes cold in law enforcement realm and nothing's coming out, it goes cold in mainstream media and in social media. And a case that was on fire and everybody was getting his face and his name out there. Now that's all stopped. We're not going to stop it here because
Yeah. Can I say one thing?
please, please.
This has just been going through my head ever since you mentioned it. You said that there were, because in a nutshell, this is what I believe I've gathered from watching the videos and from our conversation on this case. Sebastian, who is not a wanderer, allegedly goes off wandering. He goes off wandering on a relatively cool to cold night without his shoes on, all behaviors that are not normal for him. You also have, and to me, this is the only other thing that matters significantly. You have that neighborhood basically ringed with security cameras and ring doorbells where nobody saw him wandering around, leaving, going anywhere. And one of my friends told me a long time ago, shortly after I went to Homicide, is sometimes the absence of evidence is evidence itself.
Mm, so well said. Um, This is a case, it really bothers me. I think it bothers a lot of people because there's still no answers. And I think you've for sure shed some light for a lot of people on how homicide investigations work, what you've gleaned from what we've seen out in the public. And I love that you followed up with the two main things: the out of ordinary behavior, if that were true, that he left. And then secondarily, where is he on the cameras?
Yep.
And, very well said, Dale. Will you promise me to come back and talk about Delphi next time?
Well, I do have one question about a piece of Delphi evidence,
Yes.
to know what was done with it. But I'll save that for that conversation.
Oh, look at you leaving a cliffhanger. Leave the cliffhanger. Yeah. No, absolutely. And I'm hoping that we can maybe even be joined. This is something I've been working on. I would love all three of us to be on. And that is an officer that has been providing information to me on Delphi for years now, who was actually there. I'm hoping to get him on with us, but maybe he will do it by phone. And I think it would be really fascinating to have both of you on, because we love your perspective. You come in without a predetermined, thought process, just taking what we know and make some, conclusions. So I thank you for that, Dale.
My pleasure. And it was a joy to be on here with you and to work with you again.
Thank you so much.
I am disappointed by one thing.
Yes.
On the mantle that I can see behind you, I do not see a pink hat.
I knew you were going to say that. You guys, next time Dale's on to talk about Delphi, I'm going to wear this cool pink hat that I wear sometimes when I play tennis, but it's because it's so distracting. It says Homicide, and it's got like a bodies on there, and it's the pink hat. He gave that to me a long time ago when we worked a case together. So
Okay.
it'll be up there next time. Actually, it'll be on here. So thank you, Dale, so much.
Okay. I'll talk to you later, Jennifer. You have a great day.
All right, you too. Everyone, I hope you enjoyed Dale Lundberg. I hope you can go back and look at some of the cases that were featured of his on the next 48 hours, a show about homicide investigations. And listen, he's just, on here we're talking so seriously, but I got to tell you, this is one of the most well-rounded individual. He's a history buff. He plays chess. He's just, I tell you, when I don't know an answer to something, I like to call him. And even if he doesn't know the answer, he's great to talk about it, to talk it over. And then the next time he knows the answer. So thank you all for listening in. Thank you to the mods. And until next time, I pray that there is justice for Sebastian Rogers.